Right, so there were a bunch of things that actually got changed in this update, and really, if I had made a list of the stuff that I thought was semi-reasonable to do, this really exceeded pretty much anything I would have felt safe asking for. So one of the biggest limitations that you have when working with factions in Empire at War is that you're only able to do story scripting for the ones in the three main slots. So that's the Rebels, the Empire, and the Underworld slot, or the Zan Consortium. And story scripting is what you use for stuff like story missions, but the biggest limitation is that you weren't able to do things like locking and unlocking units. So we were generally able to find our way around a lot of the other limitations on story scripting by kind of scripting stuff for another faction and then having it affect the faction we wanted. But locking and unlocking units has always kind of been the one sticking point. But now you're able to set story scripts for whatever factions you want. You're also a lot less limited in how many factions you're able to have. Previously, if you had more than 21 factions coded in the game, in the entire game, not just per Galactic Conquest, then the game would crash on startup. But if you had anything in the slots past the 16th, so the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, or 21st faction that was coded, if you were attacking them on the galactic level, there was a good chance that it would crash while loading the battle. So that's all been fixed for factions up to 100. So you now have 100 potential faction slots, which also ends up meaning that for people who are focusing a lot on skirmish, you are able to do matches between whatever factions you want for mods that have a lot of factions. So for Thrawn's Revenge, for example, you used to not be able to have the corporate sector fight against the Ariado Authority if you were playing skirmish. You needed someone to be playing the Empire, New Republic, or Empire of the Hand. But now that's not a limitation anymore either. You can play whoever you want against whomever you want.
Do you think that might cause like some extra balancing for like skirmish battles in Thrawn's Revenge for particular faction against faction?
It'll make it a bit easier for us to determine some of that stuff and get some more data, because usually it ended up with people kind of just defaulting to wanting to play the New Republic or Empire, partially because they're like factions that have been established longer and the more popular factions. But it was a bit harder to kind of get the context of how all the factions would fit together if you can't really do PvP of Greater Maldrude or Ariado Authority or even the Hapens later against each other rather than just against the Empire and New Republic. So it definitely opens up some possibilities there.
Definitely, because there's a lot of ships to balance, but I feel like you guys do a pretty good job with that anyway. So
yeah, and there were another one of the changes that people will really see when they're playing themselves is that one of the issues with the game is that if you have things like secondary structures in the galactic level, so aside from your main starbase that have some sort of combat power, so if you have like goal and defense platforms you're building, the AI in Empire at War was never able to see these when they were kind of planning their attacks. So if you had your main shipyard and then you had like a goal in 1, a goal in 2, and a goal in 3, all the AI would see when they're attacking is that main shipyard and any units you have there. So they'd send a really small force and they'd lose. But now the AI is able to properly see those and take those into account when they're attacking on the galactic map, which really opens up possibilities for modders to handle defensive structures in different ways, since they're not going to be quite as cheesy anymore.
Nice. I do have one particular question, actually, just to quickly go back to the skirmish aspects. I think we talked about it before. The desync issues, did you say that there's going to be no change on that, or there was some stability changes to it?
There were a few specific causes of them that were addressed. It was something that Petroglyph seemed to really want to address as much as they could, and there were a lot of steps that they had us kind of take to test for what could be causing them in different cases. But unfortunately, it was really difficult to recreate in a debug environment, because the way it was being debugged, you ended up, it just became really difficult, especially when having people with better computers or better connections trying to play against each other or themselves to find the desyncs. So they had limited information to go off of there. Really, it comes down to the fact that it's an old game that's not like you're limited by your connection strength and your PC strength. That's one of the core causes for the desyncs. And I don't know if it's going to be something maybe that if they get another chance for another patch in the future, they might be able to do more about. But other than one or two very specific causes of them that I think they were able to address, I don't know how much movement was actually made there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense because there has been players that I'm sure that you've played against or I played against where 100% of the time it's a desync, but mostly that's mostly because of their setup. But it was just probably focusing on when you get the desync immediately and stuff. But I understand that's quite a difficult thing to handle.
Yeah, so like when I'm playing you or Eck, for example, it's usually relatively smooth for us. We'll have the occasional desync, or the games we played with Mark earlier this month. Like they tended to work pretty well, but then if you have bigger games with more players who might have worse connections or be more spread around the world, then it ends up being a lot harder to kind of see where the errors might be coming from or account for all the different connection strengths or PC strengths.
Yeah, and it's a higher chance of fail when there's more variables included.
Yeah, for sure.
Those and I'll cut this if this is not correct, but was it also not intended to be like a 4-player skirmish? Was that not actually intended, or like 8 players? Sorry.
No, that was always part of it. It's actually multiplayer skirmish for the longest time had more player slots than single player did when the game was initially released. So I think in the initial releases of the game and before the 2017 and 2018 patches, you were only able to have 4 slots when you were playing single player skirmish. And the 8 slots were there if you went to multiplayer. Like back in the day, you got some pretty big matches when the game ran multiplayer through GameSpy. But now that however it's set up through Steam seems to be somewhat less reliable. I could also just be looking back with like nostalgia glasses or nostalgia goggles there, because maybe it was desyncing just as much, but I was like 13 and didn't notice.
So what are the biggest things that you're excited to make in Empire at War mods, or any other developers that are working on their own Empire at War mods? What do you think is the biggest thing that they'll be introducing into, Awakening the Rebellion, Thrawn's Revenge, so on and so forth?
Right. So the faction stuff and the story scripting stuff I talked about might seem like kind of the more obvious stuff to players on what you can accomplish with that at kind of face value, but there were a few other changes that they've made in this patch that really do open up a lot of possibilities for us. One of the changes that was actually made is something relatively simple that just involves how text strings are handled. So the way the game displays text is you have a database file essentially full of all the text strings, and those have a name, so that gets referenced in the code, and then it loads up that string and it displays that. And then if that's not there, then you get the missing in brackets. So now what the game does is if there's no text string, then rather than displaying missing, it'll display the name of the text string, which means that you can actually put whatever you want in that text. So for things that are handled through Lua scripting, where you can have variables with different strings in them, you can actually have certain elements in the mission holocrons and even at the top left of the screen, which is something that Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic use a lot, with just whatever we want to throw in there, where before we had very strict limitations on what we wanted to do. For anyone who's played the last 2 releases of Thrawn's Revenge and Fall of the Republic, we have the new ship crew resource, and what we actually had to do for that release was make it so that there was a different text entry for every number of ship crews you could have. So there were 3,000 entries for like ship crews :1, ship crews :2, and just all of that. Now we just have it read the variable directly, and it should make it a bit easier to display certain information. Like it sounds like a really boring thing, but it really opens up possibilities, because one of the more difficult things with implementing features in Empire at War is communicating them to players, because the UI isn't especially moddable. So if you have more flexibility in how you're able to display information, the Lua scripting was already really flexible in the game, so that just opens up a lot more possibilities there.
Do you think this will also cut down the size of mods as well because of these optimizations?
Like the file size?
Yeah, in total.
I don't think it'd cut down the file size, because a lot of that just comes from the models and textures and maps, and those are all going to be the same. But there's a lot of possibility for optimization here. So there are two more kind of changes that impact that, where there is the option now, if you are setting up the prerequisites to build a unit, where there's like required orbital units, required orbital structures. Before, if you wanted to have a required orbital structure, then you can only have one set of them. So everything listed within that XML tag would be treated as an and. So if I put a shipyard and a Golan, for example, then you needed both in orbit at all times to build those things. And if you wanted something with different requirements, then you would have to do another variant of the unit. So you'd have to code the unit in again entirely separately, and just to give it a separate build requirement. But now you're able to use OR operators. So we can say, to build this, you either need the shipyard in orbit or you need something else. And this is something that for Thrawn's Revenge, for example, with our influence units, we used to have it so you could only build things at influence level 10 because they're all different structures. So now it can be influence level 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there's a lot of places that can be used. This can especially be used for us in reducing the number of dummy structures we spawn for the AI. So our build filters are based on the little buttons you press on the UI to have different lists of ships show up. That's actually based on having a set of different structures spawn in space when you press those buttons, so that it just kind of filters stuff in and out. For the AI, it meant that we had to spawn basically all 4 at once, plus a few other things. But now we'd be able to use a different set of them, so just one structure that we spawn for the AI and only spawn for the AI, which serves the same purpose, which means we're cutting down on the structure we're spawning by at least a quarter, which means fewer things for the game to track, fewer things for the AI to track, fewer things to spawn and get rid of, which should really help galactic performance.
So a lot less steps to follow to get to a certain result, which will mean faster loading times, I'm assuming, primarily. And then would you think there'd be any frame rate optimization with
that would primarily be related to frame rate optimization. So that's where the big gains there are going to be. Amazing. It wouldn't impact loading or saving too much. It'd probably impact saving a little bit, actually, because there's fewer objects that are going to be on the map. You're reducing, say you have 100 planets, what used to be 400 objects is now 100 objects, or possibly even less. But that's less for it to track as it's going through each tick. So it really will help in any mods that are kind of using any kind of similar system to that.
Mm-hmm. One other question. Why do you think Petroglyph wanted to do this update? Because this is the last update they made was 2018, if I'm rightly so.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a similar situation to what happened with that one, where Petroglyph, whenever they've always wanted to work on more Empire at War, and the last time they had some time between different projects, and they decided to use that to try to put out a patch. This time they were kind of in the same situation where they had some time they had like about a month that they were able to put aside between other projects to do this, because like Empire at War is still a very popular game. It's one of their most popular games, and they've always been really supportive of the modding community, so they came to a bunch of the modders and kind of asked us what we'd want to see. So it's basically, it just comes down to whenever they're able to do this kind of thing, they want to do it, which is really appreciated by all of us. It was a lot of work for them, and then even after release, they were dealing with a lot of questions from us pretty much all day to clarify some things.
It's really good to see that they are still really passionate about the game and still want to see it do well with all of you guys working so hard on it. So my final question, I guess, is, do you think there will be another update like this sooner rather than later?
I don't know about sooner. I think it's definitely possible, because it does seem to be something that they're interested in and something that they'd want to do. But I think it really just comes down to what time they have available. So, I mean, from our perspective, this is all like the stuff we got in this update, as kind of like niche as it may sound. It really opens up a lot of possibilities that modders are going to be exploring for a long time in all the different mods. So there's some other stuff that in a perfect world, I know a lot of people would want things like multi-core support, but that's a much bigger rewrite of the engine. With these, they were relatively simple fixes that they were able to do in a short period of time. Still a lot of work for them, but stuff that was a bit more within a reasonable scope. And hopefully that'll be the kind of thing they're able to do again. Maybe they'll be given the opportunity to do a whole new Empire at War at some point in the future if they can find a publisher and get Lucasfilm Games on board. But like they very clearly want to work on Empire at War. They say at pretty much every opportunity they get that they'd love the opportunity to work on more, whether that comes in the form of more patches. Maybe we'll get that. Hopefully for them, they'll get the chance to work on an Empire at War 2 or a remaster or something. But I think it really does just come down to time as far as patches go.
Yeah, the only reason I asked that question is because this seems to be the biggest patch that they've made in the past 4 years since it being on Steam, I feel, compared to all the other ones that they've previously mentioned in other posts. This one definitely feels like it has the most.
Yeah, the 2017 one, re-enabling multiplayer, was pretty big, and they fixed some issues that they kind of knew about for a while. But with this one, they really got a bunch of modders on board together, and they just asked us, like, what do you guys want from us for this? And we compiled a list of like everything under the sun between a bunch of teams. They were able to kind of narrow it down to some of the highest priority ones and get that together.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Guys, if you want to know all about the changes in this new 2021 patch, we'll link Corey's video in the pinned comment down below or in the top right info card that should be appearing now. Corey, you dive into pretty much every single thing here and what it means for modders and the game alike, so if you're interested in that, definitely go and check out Corey's video. But that does bring us to the end of the video. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in more Empire at War content on EcksToo, definitely let us know in the comments down below as well. But with that all said and done, I've been Charlie, you've been watching EcksToo, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Oh, and I didn't fucking hit record. All of that was not recorded.
Did you just record your side of it?
No.
None of it?
My microphone's muted and the desktop sounds threaded to my Apple earphones, which are not turned on. So neither audio track got recorded there.
Sweet.
We're going to have to do that all over again, Corey.
Okay.
No, I'm joking. Okay, I got it all recorded.